Oh, good evening, everyone. We've got another live episode here, and it's a very special one as we've got a very special guest, Theo Fleury, a former NHL hockey player, author, motivational speaker, and a fellow Canadian. So we're going to have a chat tonight, trying to keep it casual, more of just two Canadians chatting about the dystopian nightmare that Canada seems to be in 2024, and sure it's going to be a great one. Hello, my name is Nicholas Wands, but I'm a lawyer in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, and welcome to Don't Talk TV, and welcome to Theo Fleury. Thank you for joining us. I think this is a guest that I really don't need to introduce.
Yeah. No, it's good to be with you, sir. And
yeah, thanks for joining us. There's so many different things we could talk about, and we'll get into a couple that are maybe a little bit spicier. But first, I just wanted to talk to you because I know that you've had a personal and particular interest in issues surrounding addiction and recovering from addiction and the interplay with that with being a victim of abuse. And obviously, as a criminal lawyer, that's something that I come across a lot in my line of work.
Yeah.
And, I guess the big one that's always on my mind is you hear about, the safe injection sites and things like that. That's kind of a hot topic right now. They're shutting down some of them in Ontario. I don't know if they even have them in Alberta. And given your background and the work you've done with people, what do you think of those?
Well, I think we should first back up and give some perspective. I've been basically studying human behavior for the last 20 years of my life. And what I've discovered is, we're very aware that there's a mental health crisis on the planet. We're very aware that there's an addiction crisis as well. But what I believe is what we do have before the mental health and the addiction stuff is we have an unresolved trauma crisis on the planet. And trauma is the catalyst which brings us into the mental health space and brings us into the addiction space, right? Because, we're traumatized as either children, adolescents, or adults, right? We're going to, nobody's immune from experiencing trauma. And so that trauma leaves us in emotional pain and suffering, okay? And what is emotional pain and suffering? Mental illness, okay? So we walk around in life dealing with this unresolved pain and suffering. And so how are we going to deal with it? Well, we tend to gravitate towards the dark side of life and get involved in addictive behavior as a coping mechanism to suppress the emotional pain and scars that are left behind from trauma. And so as a society, we have done a really poor job of creating safe spaces and safe environments for people to talk about their trauma, okay? And so my story is filled with trauma, mental health, and addiction issues, right? And so when I see these safe ejection sites, I see people who are in severe emotional pain and suffering. And that's why they need whatever, their coping mechanism is, that's what they need. And so instead of giving them the coping mechanism and ignoring that they have trauma, why don't we ask them, what happened to you, right? Like, what happened to you? Because you just didn't wake up one day and have mental illness, and you just didn't wake up one day and have an addiction issue. What happened to you, right? And so I don't see any good coming other than the fact that we're enabling these people to continue the behavior, and we're not getting to the core of the reason why they need safe injection sites. And there's no politician out there that actually gets the concept And, it's just a Band-Aid solution for a bigger problem.
Yeah. And that mirrors a lot of what I see, because I myself haven't dealt with addiction issues, fortunately, but criminal lawyer, lots of my clients deal with addiction issues. And that's what I always tell people is I've maybe had 1 or 2 clients that got into drugs because they were into partying. But even then, they were probably into partying as a coping mechanism. All of them
100%.
have some terrible stuff that happened in the past. But the justice system and society still seems to have this concept of, no, people, they choose to
well, it's not a justice system. Let's get that straight. It's a legal system. That's all it is. It's not a justice system, because as a victim of being raped 150 times, my guy got 6 years, served 18 months, and was back out on the street again, right? And what do we know? 95% of pedophiles re-abuse or re-offend again. And so, to me, it's not a justice system. It's only a legal system. So until that changes.
Well, I work in the system, so I'll be right there with you that there's a lot that needs to change about our system. My personal view is that the problem with Canada's system is we're too harsh on the stuff that's not worthy of being harsh on. Like,
right.
They're throwing people in jail for like 18 months or because they're driving without a license one day.
Right.
But then they're too light on stuff that they ought to be really hammering. And
well, I've said this for a long time, that sexual abuse is like a living murder. Okay. Mm-hmm. Because
it's worse than a murder, because you murder, you're dead, and that's
exactly. You got to live with this this horrifying, terrible experience that you've had, and ultimately, it falls on your plate to do your own personal healing. Otherwise, and being around this subject for as long as I have, most men who have been sexually abused end up taking their own lives, right? Mm-hmm. Because, like I said, there's no place in society for me to talk about, what happened to me and not be judged and not be ridiculed. And then when I go in front of the legal system sees me as a victim. And so they think they can still treat me that way and talk to me a certain way because, ultimately I'm a victim. So the system is set up to re-victimize victims. You know what I mean? And it's ridiculous. Right. Like, I've sat in a lot of courtrooms where I had to restrain myself from jumping over the table and absolutely dummying the defense lawyer who is questioning, this poor innocent kid or, a young woman who, nobody's at fault here other than the person who actually did the deed. And eventually, that person gets off on a lenient sentence, which just basically says, you know what, you can go out and do it again, and you're only going to have to serve 18 months. Right. And, what I know about pedophilia is the urge is greater than their own common sense. So even though they know that they're doing something bad, they can't control the urge to, groom somebody and then eventually, victimize.
I mean, there's that, but the pedophiles I've dealt with, and because I have to represent these people sometimes, is a lot of I find that they live in an alternate reality. Like, they'll be telling me stuff, I'm like that's just insane what you're telling me.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of, she was seducing me. I'm like, what, that 10-year-old child was seducing you? Like, do you have any concept of how insane that sounds? You talk about having to restrain yourself from jumping across the table and doing something to someone. But, what you're saying about the defense lawyers, questioning these children and that, it's a tough situation because we have to balance, having that compassion for these people and wanting to believe them, but we also have to balance with the fact that there is such a thing as wrongful, false accusations, and there has to be.
Yeah, but in my
of
experience,
sussing that out.
when you tell that story, there's no way you can lie. There's just no way you can lie, because like after I wrote my book, like I got run over, completely run over by people everywhere I went, every speaking engagement, every workshop, every book signing, like 5, 10, 20 people were coming up and saying, hey man, you told my story, me too. So, they say that the true stat is 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 5 boys before the age of 18 will have some sort of unwanted sexual experience. So that's, 2/8. 2/8 is 1/4. So 1 out of every 4 people that walk the face of the earth are going to have this experience. And so the amount of people who lie about this is like 0.00001 is how I see it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it could be, but I think the problem is you still have to have a justice system that's based on.
But it's not a justice system; it's a legal system.
But I mean, even you got to have a system. I can't see anything better than having that presumption of innocence, because otherwise, and it has to be the same for everyone. I don't think you can have a system that functions where there's one set of rules if you're accused of one thing and another set of rules if you're accused of another thing. So that's the difficulty. There's no perfect situation. Right. There's no perfect solution. It's like, what's the least bad?
Okay, so then let me ask you this. Then how come one of the biggest industries on the planet that creates the most amount of money is child and human trafficking? It's a $200 billion industry. How does that happen? Well, because there's no justice system. There's only a legal system.
Well, I think how that happens also is I think that there's not nearly enough resources put into fighting that.
Right.
And looking into it. And
because judges and lawyers and politicians are involved in that industry. That's the only way I can make
But I mean, I guess there's also a question of why are the police not focused more on that too?
Well, they're involved too.
Because my problem is the police, they'll go to the ends of the earth to find a guy who made some memes for a neo-Nazi group. Like they'll spare no expense to hunt that guy down. He made some memes. I've talked about this case so many times because it just seems like, okay, not a fan of neo-Nazis, but you're going to spend that much energy and resources to hunt that guy down when you could probably find 100 human traffickers with a couple hours of work if they wanted to really look into that. And it's a matter of a lot of resource allocation. And I mean, there's a lot. Maybe there are people in high places that are involved in this stuff, but there's a lot of low level stuff too. And I don't know. It just seems like maybe is it because certain demographics are the perpetrators.
Who are the biggest consumers of child and human trafficking? Pedophiles, right?
Yeah. Well, and then there's the pornography industry too, is massive as well. Why is that allowed? Why is that never outlawed? They talk about how, Me Too, and we're trying to be compassionate people, but then you've got this giant industry that's just about exploiting people. I mean, they try and say people, they want to get into that, and liberals even say, we should legalize prostitution. Like, because people are voluntarily getting into prostitution. Like, very few people, I think, just wake up and say, hey, you know what, I want to be a prostitute. Usually it's they get, these guys get them with drugs or some other way to kind of force them into it. And
well, there's a grooming process there too, right? And all of this DEI stuff and SOGI stuff and all, I just see it as one big grooming organization that are grooming society.
And it's interesting with the DEI.
And last time I checked, grooming is against the law. So
but then there's other stuff that's against the law, like for example the whole conversion therapy law that went in. When you actually look at the details of what it says, like as a parent, you're not even allowed to talk to your kids about, like, because you're a homophobe if you think that, oh, maybe your child has something going on that is what's leading them to have same-sex attraction, because that's conversion therapy. The definition is so broad that if you sit your child down and say like, hey, is something going on? Did something happen to you? Is that why you're having these attractions? That's actually illegal. If they went to the police and said, hey, my dad sat me down and and I think that's totally re-victimizing people too, because there's a whole section that you can't even talk about because no, that's conversion therapy, that's homophobia, and then you're actually denying people help and re-victimize them even more because you're saying, no, that's your identity. You're not allowed to help that person or try to talk to them in any way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, we're in a scary place. We're in a scary place. And, but, the world's been in scary places like this, numerous times. If you go back as far as the Bible, Sodom and Gomorrah and, the Romans, the Greeks, every.
Well, yeah. I mean, the world's been a scary place probably more than it's not been a scary place. If you look through history, there's been a lot of tough times. But I said I wanted to we'd talk a little bit about, we go down maybe a bit of a rabbit hole because there's some tweets that you posted that are on some topics that have been of particular interest to me. So I thought we'd talk about that a little bit. So there was one where Jagmeet Singh recently had some comments. I guess it was a press conference or something like that, where Richard, maybe if you could throw that up on a screen share, and we'll play a little bit of that. Let's see what Mr. Singh had. Okay, Richard, I thought you had the audio issues all sorted out. Well, anyway, this is the one, Theo, where he's got. Here we're working now.
To be really blunt, I've seen a lot of older white men fail upwards again and again, and that is just going to continue unless we actually try to change things. So I fundamentally believe if you don't change things, you're going to have the same system, and the same system is going to benefit those that were already in power. So you have to fundamentally do things to change it, and that's what Equal Voice is about. Saying we got to change the way things are if we want different results. If you want different outcomes, you can't just hope they're going to happen. You got to make them happen, and that's with policies. That's by putting in place real clear strategies. And so I want to thank you for the work you.
That's enough from Jagmeet. I mean, watching that, I mean, there's a few things he's saying there that aren't wrong, right? I mean, we're talking about there's got to be some serious changes to the system. Okay, I think he and I would have totally different, and probably you have totally different concept of what those changes should be. And I do find it extremely hypocritical from a guy who's failed upwards and totally benefited from the system to be complaining about the system like that. But I'll let you give your thoughts. What did you think about that clip?
Well, what people don't understand is that the NDP party, from its inception, has always been a socialist communist party. Okay. And in Canada, we are a supposed democracy. So why would we have a communist party involved in any aspect of, society, right? And so that little clip is all about divisiveness, right? Pitting different nationalities against each other. That's all it is.
Race warfare, all that.
He is one of the dumbest human beings on the planet, like bar none. I don't even know why he gets a platform, because some of the stuff he does and says is absolutely ridiculous. And and there's a reason why Canada's in the situation that it's in, and he is the number one culprit for everything that is wrong with Canada today.
Yeah, I mean, him and Trudeau, I mean, I don't even know why they're different parties, just I think to give the illusion of choice and to make people think that there's different parties. I mean, they're really the same. I mean, same person, just different exteriors. But right.
He's an absolute embarrassment to leadership. There's nothing about him that says I'm a leader, right? Nothing, you know.
Yeah,
And,
and he's this big socialist who drives around in a Maserati. Like nothing says a man of the people like a guy who drives a Maserati while people can't even food bank visits are the highest they've ever been.
Yeah.
And but yeah, you're wondering about why is the Socialist Communist Party allowed in Canada? I mean, that's a good question, but it's always been that way. I don't know if you have had the same experience where you've lived. But I remember when I was a kid at junior high, high school. I mean, the Soviet Union was still around then, and our media was always like kind of, they're good, they're trying to make people equal. And like, now after learning some history, I'm like, what, like these guys
the only thing that comes out of communism is mass death. That's it. That's it. Nobody's lives are improved. Nobody's better,
But that's not real communism. We need to bring in the real communism, and then that's not going to happen.
Yeah, well, it will be because they're trying to take our guns away, and when you're trying to take people's guns away, you're probably up to something that you shouldn't be doing. If people have the right to defend themselves, and you're taking away the thing that they can use to defend themselves, you're probably up to no good.
Well, yeah, if you look historically, who are the people that have always taken away weapons versus you consider who are the people that there's been governments or nations past that actually required their citizens to be armed.
Right.
And those are governments that are not afraid of their people. They want their citizens armed because, hey, your country will never, ever be conquered if your entire citizenry is armed and they love their country and they're ready to stand up for it. You only need to disarm people if you're concerned that, hey, they might not like what we're doing, and they might.
Yep. Well, and who went to Klaus Schwab's school of psychopaths? Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau. So there you go. And the World Economic Forum is an absolute terrorist organization that should be shut down. Should have zero influence in the world at all. And anybody, like when the head of that organization calls us a bunch of useless eaters, what does that tell you?
Well, yeah, I mean, it sure shows what their attitude towards humanity is,
right?
And the human beings. I mean, they try to portray themselves as humanitarians, but then you say stuff like that, I think that shows what you really, what you really think of people.
Yeah. So and he also said, in a speech that he basically owns 50% of the people that sit in the House of Commons. He owns them. Like it's Nick, it's unbelievable where we're at. You know what I mean? It's like it like you said, it's this dystopian nightmare that you when you have time to yourself and you're thinking about, how can I make a difference and how can I make this place better? And you're watching, you're watching a clip that we just watched and you're going, so white racism is now a thing in Canada?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's been a thing for a while. I mean, I don't know. I mean, for an example, we've got hate crime laws. And you see people get jacked up on those for, I mean, some of the one that comes to mind fairly recently, there's a Sohei Chapu case from Quebec. The guy was doing a bunch of articles on the internet talking about, forget the exact details, but, he was talking about saying, well, Jews are involved in banking and they did this and they did that. And so he wrote some articles with some unpopular opinions. And for that, that guy went to jail for years. I think he got like 2 years jail or something like that. But then Richard, this is like a couple of years ago, I did a video talking about, what happens when it's a white person who's on the receiving end of that. I mean, we know what happens if it's Christians on the receiving end. I mean, I think it's up to 400 churches have been burnt down now. Yeah. And the prime minister is saying, oh, well, it's understandable that people want to do that. But there's a case actually from Alberta. We'll play this brief clip from Richard. What episode is this again? 186, I think. So it's like a year or so ago. We'll watch what I had to say.
We can also look to the courts. How do the courts deal with cases when a white person is the victim of an apparent race-based attack? I have here a case from the Provincial Court of Alberta from 2016 on this topic, Her Majesty the Queen and Tamara Crowchief. And you can find the link for this in the show description as always. The facts are summarized in the introduction. The offender, Tamara Crowchief, pleaded guilty to assault causing bodily harm to Lydia White and 3 counts of breaching a recognizance. She admits that on November the 1st, 2015, while bound by recognizance, she was outside a Southwest Calgary pub with 2 friends. It was about 9 p.m., a time when the offender was to be in her residence. The victim, White, came out of the pub with a friend. One of the offender's friends approached White's friend and asked for a cigarette. White's friend obliged and began a conversation. Suddenly, the offender came up to White, yelled, quote, "I hate white people," unquote, and punched White in the mouth. The blow knocked out one of White's front teeth. And when Ms. Crowchief was booked, she told police that, quote, "the white man was out to get her," end quote. What did the judge have to say about this? He reviewed a number of cases where courts found that racial hatred was a motivation. So, for example, the Queen and Sims, the accused acted on his neo-Nazi philosophy and targeted the victim for his victim's supposedly pro-Semitic views. Another case here, Her Majesty the Queen and Van Brunt, the armed accused targeted a black person unknown to them. Both before and during the assault, they used a number of racial slurs. There was little else said in the course of the 1-minute-long assault. Her Majesty the Queen
Richard, we can actually stop it. We don't watch the whole video. So the link, if people want to watch the whole videos, and I'll cut to the chase and watch the whole details. Long story short, the judge said, no, this isn't a hate crime. So it's not a hate crime to run up to a white person, totally unprovoked, punch her in the mouth saying, "I hate white people." I mean, to me, that's as clear as it gets. That's 2016 in Alberta, which people always say, "Oh, Alberta is so much more conservative than the rest of the country." Well, I don't know if it's that different, but
from a psychological perspective, hate is a learned behavior. Okay, so if it's a learned behavior, if hate is a learned behavior, it can be unlearned. Okay, anything that can be learned can be unlearned, right? So to me, that was her growing up, hearing from every angle of her life, "I hate white people." So she grows up to be that person. You know what I mean? So, and it's like bullying too. Like bullies, you know, you don't grow up a bully. You learn how to be a bully, right? You know, and so anything that can be learned can be unlearned. And what we have politicians who are constantly throwing logs on the fire of hate, and they are championing it, and they are putting it out there. And what Jag in that clip is Jagmeet throwing another log on the fire.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I mean, it's
stoking more and more and more, right? So
well, and I just look at. I mean, I grew up in Winnipeg. Lots of Indigenous people in Winnipeg. Yeah. We all got along fine when in the 80s, 90s.
Yeah,
like race wasn't really a thing. I think we were actually pretty close in the 80s and 90s to being past all that stuff. But then after a bit or after 2000, they start ramping up and all this stuff, and they're always talking about it now. Yeah. Always like identifying, people are defined by, their demographics. They're defined by their race, even hiring practices and all that. And it seems like there's a lot more anger and hatred than there was back then, and it's being
and who is
by them constantly
who's the guy that came out of the gates in 2015 and was like, "I am going to divide this country into every sect, denomination, race"? Justin Trudeau is the guy that changed all of that.
Well, speaking of Justin Trudeau, I know you shared another clip of Justin Trudeau. I think I see Richard's got it queued up, so I think it's a short clip. We'll play what he had to say here. I mean, it's a little bit similar topic, but a little bit different too, because it's talking about the immigration situation, what's happening in Canada with that.
Canadians continue to have confidence in immigration as a good thing for our economy, good thing of our country, because they know we have a strong and rigorous immigration system that adjusts depending on the needs and the opportunities for Canada to grow and integrate more people. That is what we are continuing to defend. That is what we fight for every single day. While the Leader of the Opposition talks down Canada, talks down Canadians, and puts partisan attacks ahead of reasonable policy solutions, we're going to do the work necessary to protect Canadians and protect our immigration system.
So just first of all, I'm going to say, I don't think he's correct when he's saying that Canadians are still in favor of this like almost unlimited immigration we've had.
Mhm.
And I'm just going to hasten to add, while Richard's getting the National Post article that I think contradicts the Prime Minister, is it's not a racism issue. It's just like any country can only handle so many new people, especially as immigrants. Like if you have new people coming by way of babies, those babies don't need a job. They don't need their own house. They don't need all that right away. You got about a runway of about 18 years before they start needing that stuff. So you have time to build it. But when you're bringing in huge numbers of people, they need a job right away. They need a house right away. So, they'd always try and frame it as you're racist if you're against immigration. It's not a racism thing. I mean, it's just any country can only handle so much.
It's common sense, and our politicians have no common sense, right?
Yeah.
We can throw out the great replacement theory right now. The World Economic Forum, one of their goals is to wipe us off the map, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyway, just quickly, here's the National Post article. So according to that, it's saying that nearly half of Canadians favor mass deportations and 65% think there's too many immigrants. So I don't think the Prime Minister, to put it mildly, with some very Canadian style understatement, I mean, he's just not accurate. Because I mean, the country, that's also why the country's transformed. I mean, before COVID, this was a country of 30 million people. We're what, 42 million people now? I mean, what country could withstand that? I mean, I think people have
especially when they basically shut down the oil and gas sector in Alberta. They're anti-business. They're, you know what I mean? They're big government. That they have no concept of leadership. They have no concept. They have tunnel vision. And let's face it, Trudeau is the most blackmailed, compromised prime minister that we've ever had in our history. And it ain't hard to see that we're going down the path of the World Economic Forum and their sustainable bullshit that they're bringing to the whole entire planet, which is global communism, right?
Yeah.
And he's their number one. He's their number one guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's funny because they'll always say, "Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist if you say that." But then if you compare what they publicly say,
you know what
compared to what's actually happening. Well, where's the conspiracy? It's this is just a coincidence that everything that they say is what's happening.
No, you know what conspiracy theories are? People are conspiracy theory. People are. We are people who recognize patterns.
Yeah,
and pattern recognition is among the highest IQ people on the planet. Is people who can recognize patterns.
Well, and the whole term conspiracy theorist only came out after the assassination of JFK because people were noticing, hey, this isn't all adding up here. So then they kind of came up with this new term to shut people down, to say, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. I'm pretty sure, I know I've read that a number of places, that they said the term conspiracy theorist didn't really exist before then.
No, and they use it against us, and we're just among the people who are awake and see that this is not sustainable. This is not sustainable, and there's going to be some really good people who get severely hurt by this kind of, whether that's spiritually, physically, emotionally, you know, that's what it comes down to. And you know, who do you think the biggest perpetrators of trauma are on the planet? Government. From day one, they've been the biggest perpetrators of trauma on the planet. And COVID was the perfect example of that, right? Lock this down. What happened when they locked this down? Oh, we had a spike in mental illness. We had a spike in suicide. We had a spike in opioid addiction. You know what I mean? And it's all because the government caused trauma to its own citizens who voted them in to give us the basics. You know, we don't need politicians talking to us about, you know, racism and all that. There wasn't any before Justin Trudeau came along.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good point. I mean, I'm not a libertarian, but I mean, government definitely should have a much more limited role. Like, you don't need government for a lot of the stuff that our government does. I mean, really, I think all you really need government for is, I mean, for national defense.
Yes.
To put together an army.
Yeah.
You need them to like enforce contracts and have some sort of a court system.
Yep.
And I know there's a third thing, but I mean, most of the stuff that our government's doing now is just, it could be done way better, and there'd be probably
and our tax system is probably the biggest culprit, right? The tax system pushes people into the medical system, because if you can't afford a healthy diet and lifestyle, what's going to happen? It's going to push you right into the medical system, right? And the whole goal of the medical system is, or it's not even a medical system, it should just be called Big Pharma. And Big Pharma's goal is to have you on a script from the time you arrive until the time you leave, on as many scripts as possible, right? That's the goal. That's our medical system, right?
Yeah, well, because I guess there isn't a whole lot of money in, not a lot of money in healthy people, but that, I mean, that also just looked like there's just something that always seemed really wrong to me, to have people who are like Big Pharma being so massive and so rich. Like, how can you be that rich if you're supposedly trying to help people? Like, it just, you look at it like, because I mean, that's got to be one of the biggest industries there are now, is the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, if not the number one on the planet, you know.
And I think it goes back to also a lot of the band. I mean, there's the aspect, I think you're right on, about people not being able to afford good food, getting bad food. I mean, Big Pharma and big agriculture, they're kind of intertwined, and a lot of times the same
they're all
the
in
same companies that own this stuff.
Yeah.
So they're spraying all the poison on the food, and then they've got got the medicine to back it up. But I'm just going to say, just
even,
a comment
even that medicine, it does nothing. The medicine does nothing. Right?
Yeah.
It really doesn't. Because when's the last time Big Pharma, you know, came up with a cure?
Right? Yeah. So I just want to, I'm just going to quickly, address what KQH is saying. What I was describing is indeed libertarianism. I guess what I was talking about is like anarcho-capitalism. That's what a lot of libertarians, like the really hardcore libertarians, because they're the ones who are always angry, telling me like, you're not a libertarian because you think there should be even some government. I don't think anarcho-capitalism can work. No. I think because people, unfortunately, just human nature, you need some sort of authority to kind of keep people from
non-ego based authority. Non-ego based authority, right? You know, and you know, another aspect of this whole thing is where are we with spirituality? Like where does God come into this picture? Because all they've done is try to eliminate him in every aspect of our lives, right?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's been one of my I guess kind of themes. Is you look at our Constitution, the very first words are that Canada is founded upon the recognition of the supremacy of God and the rule of law. So I'm like, well, we got rid of number one, the supremacy of God. So no wonder we don't have the rule of law anymore, because the very first thing in our Constitution has been, as you say, it's like been actively pushed aside, gotten rid of, and then that goes back to where you're talking about the trauma and all that. A lot of it, it's a spiritual problem too. I mean, I think that's a trauma, is that humans naturally have a desire for something. They have that natural desire for God and something beyond themselves. But then that's taken away. They're told from the beginning that no, that's crazy. You know, you and then they're missing. There's like a hole inside their soul and in their heart from day one. And unfortunately, you know, even the churches are kind of in on this stuff. Like, you look at so many of them, it's such a disaster. Like, a lot of them, it's like, you're not even like, what are you even teaching? You're just, it's like a social club, a lot of them, unfortunately. I mean, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, well, the only reason why I'm still alive and I'm still living is 19 years ago, I hit my knees in a washroom and I surrendered and turned my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand them. And because when I was running the show, wasn't a good show. You know what I mean? And, you know, once I reintroduced the concept of God back into my life is amazing. My mental illness went away. My addiction problems went away. My relationship problems went away because God is running my life. And I'm not running it. I'm not running it. God
He knows a lot more than we do.
100%. You know, and there's a plan for each and every one of us. And the only time the plan goes sideways is when we disconnect from God. But when we fully embrace that, you know, God is everything, then all those problems and all those issues go away, right? And we have a bunch of people in Ottawa who, you know, are all Satanists who are running this show. And when that happens, you're witnessing it in real time every single day for the last how many years that Trudeau has been in power. You've seen that deteriorate, and, you know, the rule of law is gone, all these things. And so what happens? Chaos and insanity follow right behind when you eliminate God out of the equation. And so this is all being done on purpose.
And it's always been
premeditated. Like, it's premeditated craziness. Premeditated insanity.
It's been premeditated by the same guy who, right at the very beginning, went hid himself inside the form of a snake and went and convinced the first woman to eat that forbidden fruit, who then convinced the first man to eat that forbidden fruit. I mean, it's the same person. Then, you know, no one in our chat box has been taking any issue with you calling our leaders Satanists, but just
in order to be a member of the world, in order to be a member of the World Economic Forum, you have to swear an oath to serve Lucifer.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. So,
but even if there isn't a formal oath, I mean, I think if you just look at what they're doing, look at the actions. Are these the actions of, you know, of God and love for humanity and moving things forward? You know, the things we've just been talking about. Is it that, or is it going against that? And if it's going against anti-Christian,
the old Canadian values, hard work, love of God, love of community. Like, he destroyed all of that in like 10 short years, one generation, generation. He did all of that.
Yeah. Well,
because when I grew up in Canada, I grew up small town Canada. My parents were poor. We were dirt poor. We lived in a low rental home, you know, small house. We were on top of each other. You know, we could barely rub two nickels together. And I discovered this wonderful game called hockey. And I'm like, oh my God, here's my out. If I work hard, if I respect people, if I care about people, you know, if I can get out of this situation. Can you say that now? No, you can't. You can't say that now. Those, you know, postmodern Canada is craziness and insanity. That's what it is. There is no hope. Where's the hope?
And that's the interesting thing is even the people who totally are in favor of everything our government's doing, they're just as miserable as the rest of us, maybe even more so.
Yeah, and you know, since when do we live in a world where God is the supreme being? Why are we selling scarcity?
Mm-hmm.
God is a God of abundance, and these guys are selling scarcity every single day, scaring the shit out of people. But if you're a believer, I live in abundance. I don't live in scarcity. I don't fall into the trap of scarcity because I know God wouldn't have created this amazing place if he knew eventually everything was going to run out.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And God wouldn't create God don't create viruses. He creates health and wealth and abundance and all this shit. And we got these crazy people who are selling this crap.
Yeah, well, you're right about the scarcity, and the scarcity stuff they always sell never comes to fruition, right?
Oh.
Like I remember, you know, they were talking about was in the 70s or 80s, they're talking about, we're going to hit peak oil in the next few years, and then there's going to be no oil. Well, I mean, now there's more oil that's been discovered that they're drilling than was ever present. Or they're always talking about, you know, what back when the world was like 3 billion people, they're like, oh, everyone's going to starve to death because there's not enough food. Well, it's 7 billion now, and there's more food than ever. I mean, if it was actually distributed and our systems weren't the way they are, I mean, there's so much food in Canada. Why are people going to food banks? Why is food unaffordable?
Because of Justin Trudeau's policies. This is where, you know, like the two World Juniors I played in were both in communist countries. The first year we were in communist Czechoslovakia, and the second year we were in communist Russia. And I saw firsthand. And I'm telling you right now, we are not far from what I saw.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, my wife is Polish. She grew up in communist Poland, and she's frequently saying like this is getting to be what I grew up in. Like all these things I see, and well, I don't know, lots of Eastern European people are like that. I know, like when COVID, like the day COVID happened, my wife is like, I've seen this movie before. This is complete communism. We're not going along with any of this. So me, typical Canadian, I'm like, well, you know, let's see what happens. Like, nope, it's communism. So I'm okay.
Yeah. No, it's, you know, this is the last battle that the Bible talks about, right? We're in it. This is it. Good versus evil. This is it. God versus Satan. So for those of you out there, I tell everybody, get right with God. Get right with God. Put on the suit of armor, which is God. And if you do that, you have absolutely nothing to be afraid of. Nothing. Nothing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, you know, the phrase, you know, put God, well, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all these things will be added to you. You put God first, things are going to fall into place. I mean, it might seem tough, it might seem scary, but you put your trust there, things tend to work. As bad as all the craziness is that's going on around us. And just another point I was thinking of as we're talking, you know, you're talking about the old school Canadian values, and those are essentially Christian values, all the things you listed. I think that's what it really comes back to. I think it's a bit of a smokescreen almost to say, oh, it's like anti-white stuff. At the end, it's anti-Christian stuff. It just appears to be anti-white because Christian or Europe was, for most part, all Christian at one point. And that's the culture that Canada is based on. So it kind of seems like it's anti-white.
And
I think really it's anti-Christian.
We were once one of the greatest countries in the world because of those values, right? Now you can't put a Canadian flag on your backpack and go through Europe.
Oh yeah?
No, because Justin Trudeau ruined it, destroyed it. Post-national state, admirer of basic dictatorships.
Yeah, I guess it depends on where you go. I know, just anecdotally, I went to Poland last year with my family, and in Poland, they still had, my impression is they seem to still have kind of a good impression of Canada, but they didn't know, they had no clue what was going on in Canada. And
Yeah, because the
I know
media,
some of them,
the media is not,
well,
you know.
yeah, and talking to a lot of my Polish relatives, they would, they've never actually heard Justin Trudeau talk. They've only seen him with Polish dubbing. So they're like, oh, well, he seems quite well spoken to me. I'm like, well, that's because you've never actually heard him talk. You've heard someone speaking Polish. Who knows if what they're saying even has anything to do with what he actually said.
Right. Yeah.
But
well, and you know, I work for a small independent media company here in Calgary called Canadians for Truth, and you know, the fact is that the independent media, we've won the truth war. Okay, we've won it because nobody's listening to CBC anymore. Nobody's reading, you know, newspapers anymore. We're all going to X to figure out what the hell the truth is, and so I think we've won that. We've won that battle. And isn't it interesting that, you know, the Liberals are trying to pass laws, right? Pass laws that take away that people's free speech, because they know that the only way that they can implement this, you know, globalist communism ideology is for us to stop communicating and stop talking to each other. So Bill 63, 239, like all of these bills are, you know, slowly but surely being entered into, you know, the mainstream. And, you know, Bill 63 passes, I'm going to jail. I'm going to jail. Simple as that. So,
well, on that note, we've been talking for almost an hour here. I've been in court all day and all week, so I want to try and keep it to an hour, and I'm sure you've got stuff to do as well. My family's waiting for me at home, so I think we'll probably start calling it a day there. So thank you so much for coming being on here. We're going to try to figure out a way to get you one of these mugs.
Okay.
Talk TV. Canada Post, of course, is on strike, but we'll use UPS or DHS or something like that. I don't have the mustache. I did have this in the past. My kids and wife keep on saying you've got to grow it back. It's kind of fun, but a lot of work. But anyway, so we'll try to send you that as a show of appreciation for coming on. So thanks a lot for
my pleasure. I always, you know, on. I'm in the fight, and I've been here for quite a long time, and you know, I just know abuse like nobody else knows abuse because I went through it. You know, I know what it's like to be groomed. I know what it's like to be manipulated. I know what it's like to be coerced, and early on in this shit show, I saw the government was using the same tactics that my pedophile abuser used against me to get me to do whatever he wanted me to do. And you know, when I came out with my story, I made a promise to myself that if I saw abuse, I was going to call it out. And that's all I've been doing for the last 5 years. And I will continue to do it. And I will die on this hill. I will die on this hill. Right.
Well, thanks for doing that. And thanks for having the courage to stick by your principles. Because I think a lot more people agree with what you're saying than what they admit, but a lot of people are scared of being called crazy or, you know, getting ostracized. That was my impression of a lot of COVID. Is most people I talked to, they agreed with me when I was saying this is crazy.
Right?
Should we just be like, oh, but I don't want to lose my job, or I don't want my neighbor to think I'm crazy. But anyway, so.
Well, you know what I tell people who are scared? I go, God has a bigger plan for you, and it's not to be a slave to anything. Great, start a new business. Like, step out of the matrix. It's pretty awesome out here. Outside the matrix is awesome. Like, really. Like, I see that, you know, when you're outside the matrix, that's the new world. That's where we're headed. That's where we're going. So, you know, you might as well do it now, and you'll experience less pain and suffering when you step out of the matrix and stand in your truth. Right. And 2009, I wrote a book. I stood in my truth for the very first time in my whole entire life. And I wasn't going to go back into the matrix again. I was going to stay outside of it and just, you know, God, I knew God was on my side, and he still is, and he will be with me, you know, through this whole journey that we're on. And you know, ultimately God wins, and that's faith, right? Mm-hmm. If you have faith, you know that God wins, and, you know, whatever happens along the way, you know, you just have to stay true to yourself and stay in conscious contact with this God of your own understanding, and he will take care of everything that needs to be taken care of.
Right.
And that's been my experience.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, yeah, thanks again. I just got to give a quick shout out to Greg Wycliffe. Actually, I saw him in the comments box. I was going to give a shout out to him earlier. He's going to be on with us next week for another live. So tune in for that. I talked to him last week. We had a great chat. So now kind of returning the favor, he's then going to join me since I was on his show. Actually, it wasn't last week, it was earlier this week. That shows how long this week has been. I feel like it was already a week ago. But so tune in for that. And thanks again, Theo. And of course, I've got to give my lawyerly disclaimer that nothing in this video is legal advice. If you need legal advice, call a lawyer. My contact information is going on the ticker on the bottom there if you're in Ontario. And although even if you're outside of Ontario, I can, you know, I might be able to give you some little bit of advice, although mostly in the criminal area, which nowadays people need that more than for stuff that I never thought they need it for. Like I've talked about in previous episodes, some of the crazy conversations I've had with CSIS agents and RCMP officers that I never thought I'd have. But if you any show topics or things you'd like to see us cover, ideas you have of things you'd like me to ask Greg next week, please send us an email to the email address that's going on the ticker there, or leave a comment in the comment section. And if you found this video at all interesting, helpful, informative, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. We've been stuck at like 8.3 thousand subscribers for 2 years. We're trying to get to 10. So please subscribe, spread the word. And thanks again, Theo, for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Take care, man, and keep up the good work.